Hi, everybody, and welcome to the new show. Kevin Smith, the Great Witness, presents the New Adventure Is series. Kevin Smith, the Great Witness, will be sharing his real side experiences and insights, and we will make comments and ask questions and become more aware. So, to you, Kevin.
In this real side experience, I would find myself in the midst of more dark force deception, the purpose of which, as would be the case with any dark force real side creations and set up situations, would be to cause doubt, confusion, and disruption, to put individuals off and have them walking away from their golden opportunity of recognizing the is and saving themselves therefore from a simulator in its death spiral due to the agreements to control that make this simulator demise so. The dark force trickery and skullduggery has been widely reported by numerous new friends and aware folk, and I have experienced my fair share. The dark forces have the ability to mimic, replicate, and churn out fake Dwanes, real guides, and any other aware individual or new friend they feel is necessary to cast doubt with the personal self of the one they target. Many of these fake guides, Dwanes and such, are cloned vehicles, robots, and holograms, as the controllers have all manner of technologies they can draw upon for their deceptive needs. They also are highly skilled in the art of shape-shifting, and can freely then assume whatever outward form they wish, for whatever purpose doing so serves. The personal self can readily be fooled by what is presented on the surface, because alone it can't discern or read beyond what it is visually presented with. The intent of the faked replicas will remain concealed, assuming the dark force fakes put on a good marketing surface act to go with their visual deception. This carries across to the real side also with the personal self. It cannot alone see through the deception of the cloned, shape-shifted, or holographic faked individuals in its midst. It just receives whatever it is presented with, and cannot read or discern intent beyond that, unless maybe the individual is more intuitively inclined, but with most being very one-dimensional, then the surface presented front is all they will see and draw conclusions from, although even with the personal self alone, if there is attention to detail, it may detect uncharacteristic behavior with these replicated clones that won't fit with the individual that they are being presented with. Dark force characters are very personal self emotionally inclined, aggressive and abrasively attitude driven, and this often is hard for them to contain, as they attempt to assume the sort of ears, standing indifference, poise, and mannerisms of the real guides they are replicating the form of. As we become more aware, as we recognize the real awareness and operate more so from that position, the nowness of the real awareness, aside from the thoughts and emotions of the personal self, we are afforded greater depth of information because the real awareness oversees all of creation. It stands indifferent to it, and every idea that makes up creation's construction is available for its examination. All personal self-created consciousnesses, everything that makes up their construction, the drives, agendas, and the thoughts, emotions, and intents it harbors moment by moment, are all created ideas that are viewable from the perspective of the real awareness. So all intent can be discerned on the real side if we stand in the reality of the real awareness that we are. As such, all deception is laid bare on the real side, and as we are confronted with these replicated guides through the real awareness, we may see the ill intent behind the surface, displayed visually as them being distorted, malformed, or with additional features that suggest they are of dark force design. And as I said, they also will struggle with their act also, very often revert to type, to dark force attitudes of abrasiveness, and at some point, with deception being the objective, they must break the act and transition to uncharacteristic behavior through what they are conveying to us, as they attempt to put us off our awareness process. They will start to speak ill of the new presentation, or claim the NUUU is no longer effective as examples, words that even the personal self alone would know would never be spoken of by Dwayne or the real guides. Along with the faked guides and Dwayne's will be the situations they create and set up, much like the guides do, for beneficial purposes, but the dark forces' objective again will be deception, to draw your attention and focus, and to tapline you as a result of gleaning your attention. No tapline is irreversible once we recognize the deception, however, and much like their clones and shape-shifting fakery, their creations are generally lacking the finesse of the guides, are rather crude, and so, even to the personal self, the telltale signs are there. Through the real awareness again, we will discern the overall intent of the creation, as we see the overview of all the ideas that make up the scene's construction from the real awareness perspective. Of course, as we proceed on our process, we may fluctuate between real awareness standing, where we can recognize all deception, to the personal self, which can't see through the surface of whatever it's presented with, even though our overall intent of its recognition is being maintained overall. It takes a long process to be able to stand absolute with the real awareness and the reality of it as the guides do, and in the meantime, as we perhaps step into the personal self, for whatever reasons, we become vulnerable to not only attack opportunities, but we lose our real awareness, discernment, and ability to determine intent so effectively. At the time of the sharing of this experience, I had been having quite the time with my personal self, as the karma of it continues its unraveling. Also, the entertaining of various silly, created attitudes and ideas of it, that, coupled with annoying technological issues with my computers, had me rather personal self emotionally immersed, and as such, opening a window of opportunity, it seems, for another real side night of attempted dark force skullduggery. The dark forces look for any opening, any vulnerability, and if they are presented with such an opportunity, they turn it to their advantage, and are straight in there to cause as much disruption and execution of created situations as possible, designed to cause us doubt and put us off our process of awareness. For now, I would find myself in a kind of grand conference building. It rather had the sense of a place designated for a convention, for some theme or other, and indeed it seemed to be presented as a place to visit where you would encounter all the real guides, and meet the most aware of the individuals that operate in creation and on the physical. It was by special invite only, so you would indeed feel privileged to be here, and rightly so, if indeed it was similar to the real side UNUversal UNUversities, where only the sincere of intent may have access. I was perhaps deceived initially, as I stood more in my personal self-concerns and ideas, and as I carried them over to the real side. My real awareness discernment was lacking, due to my disconnection from it. But as with any ideas of the personal self, we can simply put them aside, and return to the nowness of our real awareness at any moment we decide, and generally, as we persist in continuing to maintain this practice of being now, fluctuating as it may do, we consciously and also automatically make these adjustments, despite what we have allowed to entertain, attitude or idea-wise. And so I would begin to discern the whiff of deception. My sense were things were not as they seemed to be, and indeed, as I entered the main gathering area of the most aware, seemingly, they appeared as distorted and malformed, as this was an indication of the distorted intents they evidently harboured. If they were assuming faked outer forms, I couldn't tell, as all I saw was the distortion afforded me by my real awareness. They rather looked like bipedal animals, beast people, though fragmented and twisted. And immediately they would begin to attempt to put me off my awareness process by suggesting how I had failed, how I had forfeited my journey, etc., etc. And again, as the deciders, nothing is forfeited, certainly not our journey of ears recognition, unless we decide that it is. Perhaps they didn't realize I had detected their deception, as they persisted even as I departed this main gathering area. I would ascend to the next floor of this building and find a group of very enthusiastic individuals who had been invited, or should I say, deceived, into coming here also. My real awareness reading of them discerned their sincere intentions, though I had the impression they were very naive, along the lines of very new individuals on their process, perhaps just starting out, and so lacking ability to discern intent so readily in accordance with their lack of awareness at the stage that they were. I would attempt to speak to them about this deceptive situation, but it was as though they couldn't hear me through their enthusiasm of being in such a place as this, with the real guides and the super-aware. They did recognize me, however, as they spoke of my YouTube videos that I put out, etc., but I had never met them before on the physical. So maybe a group of individuals that may soon be emerging on the physical scene and making themselves known, despite being caught momentarily in this dark force deception. Chances are their personal selves may not have even witnessed this real side experience for themselves, or recognized it for what it was if they had, but maybe they will be shown it by the real guides at a later date. Either way, nothing is irreversible. Deception, agreements, and taplines are not set in stone. We can recognize the deception and redact agreement from the created idea that it is, if indeed it is dark force created and is not beneficial. I would explore the grounds of the building now, and would find still further evidence of dark force created deception, for I would come across a large area designated as a kind of caged enclosure, and containing what looked to be large numbers of ape-like creatures. They were of varying sizes, but all very tall, a good 7 to 8 feet on average, far more sentient than your typical ape, looking rather like how you might imagine a Bigfoot or a Yeti to be. They were evidently caged against their will, and very aggressive also, and understandably so, if they were indeed restricted and locked down by dark force characters as they appeared to be, and who knew for what purpose. As I returned to the main building again, I was joined by Peter, my father, but perhaps he was in fact a real guide, as they often assume the forms of parents and older siblings. It was perhaps then a case of not just that I had been initially duped into coming here, but that I was supposed to be here too, to recognize the deception for what it was, and then report it and share it with others on the Skypes, that others may learn of the continued dark force trickery, and in all the various forms it takes. A heads up then, if you will. And now that I had recognized the deception, any agreement with it was redacted, tap lines and all, so no harm done. As Peter, or the guide, as I impressioned that he was, accompanied me, we continued to walk through the entirety of this building, to determine every facet and aspect of it, as it now became apparent that I had seen through the dark force created deception. I was suddenly accosted by 2 large snakes. They didn't have any power over me, unable to exact harm or instigate attack, as I stood in the protection of my real intent and awareness. Evidently not ordinary snakes, as they could speak and would constantly attempt to convince me to leave, to dissuade me verbally, as they were unable to assail me, with efforts to induce more doubt in my personal self through their discouraging remarks. They seemed to have very silver forked tongues, very persuasive in their suggestions and utterings, but I ignored them. They quite clearly were reptilians of some type or description. They ought to get jobs as politicians, such were the convincing nature of their words. Maybe they indeed were politicians in fact, and presented in forms that reflect their intent, as slithering reptilian serpents. Entering another part of the building, another effort was made on the part of the dark forces, one along the lines of seduction, as I had a variety of scantily dressed women throwing themselves upon me. These dark forces folk were certainly trying every option, the idea being to entice me through the emotional body of my personal self, and if successful, I would have stepped into the personal self and lost my real awareness standing and connection, and be more vulnerable, etc. Moving swiftly on, we entered a kind of chamber that could contain 20 people or so, and it had the look of a kind of group computer game. All who entered would be connected to this computer, and what they decided transpired on the large screen at the front of this chamber. It rather reminded me of that film Ender's Game, where all the children were enlisted to play out these computer game war scenarios. But little did they know, they were not merely games, but actualities, and they were in fact wiping out other species and worlds, as though interfacing with and commanding the technology that would carry it out, that to them looked like just a computer game. This seemed a similar setup, and as I watched, the dark force hosts were attaching willing individuals to the seats for what they assumed were entertaining computer-style games. I suggest these were the group or similar individuals from the floor above, as though individuals new to their awareness process, sincere as they may be, but had been deceived into coming here, thinking this was a genuine haven of real guides, and equally thinking then that everything they did here must be beneficial. As with awareness comes greater ability, and the dark forces were using the greater ability these individuals had to their controlling advantage. Perhaps not as great an ability as new friends far deeper into their awareness process, but then such new friends would have more likely discerned this deception and refused to be a part of it, whereas these budding individuals just starting their process would have the extra ability that an unconscious, unaware, one-dimensional person would lack, but not enough awareness to discern intent so readily, and hence why they were targeted by the dark forces and their abilities used here. And indeed, as I watched, these sincere, though naive individuals were blasting away at spaceships on the screen through the connection to the technology that being attached to these seats and the application of tiny sensors to their bodies provided. Perhaps they were inadvertently destroying actual spacecraft, as their real side awareness abilities were trolled. And even were it simply a computer game, the subliminal impact alone of indulging in games of such a type, those of destruction and killing, must be considered. As all these destructive type computer game themes go into the subconscious, and has its effects, and can project us into equally dire circumstances accordingly, or garner our agreement to effect such situations into actuality on the physical. agreements subliminally garnered to situations the controllers wish us to effect into overall collective experience on their behalf that suits their intent and controlling agendas. It did seem as though all these hoodwinked individuals, sincere as they may be, were unreachable, as though immersed in the bubbles of their convinced determination of their situation, genuinely thinking they were with the extremely aware and the guides, and therefore carrying out beneficial deeds in this building. Before the experience overall concluded, I did spend the last few moments with the guide, in my father's form, searching for an individual. His identity was never revealed to me, but he seemed somehow lost or trapped on this building's grounds, but desiring to be extracted. So there was agreement that facilitated his potential rescue, and that seemed now our objective. As an aside, was an additional feature of this overall dark force deception experience, an extra element they had devised to make it more convincing. I'm uncertain where this scene featured, but at one point during the experience I just related, it did. It kind of slotted in and seemed out of place, as though a segment of another movie had somehow got recorded into the movie being watched, but had nothing to do with the movie, and would be therefore somehow out of place or not make sense in keeping with the rollout of the movie being watched. It was as though the dark forces had taken a segment of real side experience and inserted it rather crudely in the middle of their created experience I had just been through. Everything visual on the real side that we experience is created, whether by ill-intended or well-intended hands, or just creations in general, throughout the endless expression of creational possibility. Created also are the body types, or any forms assumed from the forms the guides take to those of the dark forces, if we can visually perceive it through the personal self. It is created, as opposed to the is, which is a reality, that is a recognition through the real awareness that doesn't present as scenes, body types, and situations, that isn't comprised of created ideas. So it's as though anything that has been at any time created can be accessed. Scenes, situations, from wherever or whenever they may have occurred, like data reels of film that can be made use of at any time by those with the skill to do so. And these accessed scenes and experiences can be extracted, moved around, and utilized by the dark forces, if indeed they have the capability, and it seems that some of them do, much like how the real guides may choose a scene from wherever in the simulator it was created and use it for our real-side experiences. If it contains the elements that the guides wish to convey, which saves them creating a scene from scratch. And so it seemed as though the dark forces had taken a slice of a created experience and roughly inserted it in the timeline of the deceptive created situation I had just been through. And this inserted scene was a part of an experience where I was in a completely different setting and sat in a large room, plenty of seating areas and tables available, and where many individuals were indeed present. I was sat on one table, and the table closest to me would have a group of other individuals that I didn't recognize, but for one, and that was Dwayne. On this occasion I discerned the strong impression of him being the genuine article, as he exuded the undeniable isness standing real awareness signature that can't be faked, and despite the dark forces' abilities to churn out surface external form duplicates, awareness can't be faked. You either have this degree of awareness as Dwayne does, or you don't. So this scene was brief. It was genuine, in that it wasn't a dark force creation or fabrication, and every individual in that place and Dwayne were the real individuals. As I said, the tactic was applaudable, for what would make fakery more likely to succeed than to have it nestled with something that is genuine, to make it less likely that we discern the deception? The idea being to make it seem as though this brief segment of this room with Dwayne and the others there featured in the building that the dark forces had created, giving it more plausibility. But as I said, it had the feel of two very different experiences meshed together, that perhaps a personal self would not realize, but that the real awareness could recognize. Dwayne, the great writer, responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "The comparisons are very important, and especially the video game idea, which is basically a setup for people, because it's an easy way for the controllers to get people to interfere with and destroy others, just like they're doing their vaccines, and with all the deception that's going on. They're getting people to agree that the vaccines are a good thing, but they're actually destroying others. And yes, the video games too. That's why you're there to see. And especially on the real side, when people are not aware, they think they're just having fun. But anything that entails itself, where the intent is to destroy, the dark forces can utilize that. A lot of people are sucked into the video games, and the games today are all about destroying. And you have the other games, the paint guns and such. We used to have such events at Huntington Beach, where they would shoot each other with paint guns, etc. Again, the intent there is to shoot the other person, and the dark forces utilize that. So it's important to see this and share it, as most people think these are harmless video games, which they can be, but they can be reused like anything, like we see in the world here. There can be good vaccines and good medication, but once it's distorted and purposely utilized for destruction, it becomes something else altogether.
Thank you, Kevin, for sharing that. It was very concise and detailed there. And I remember I had an experience a while ago, not to get too much into mine, but with the video games and how they basically all this technological type distortion, it gets people trapped in these cyberspace dimensions, and it's just more control and more compounded and more distorted, because it's like being in a virtual reality inside of a virtual reality. It just confuses the heck out of people.
I had experience just like Kevin's, but mine one I didn't see. It wasn't offered to me as a game. It wasn't shown to me as a game. It was just mine was like, well, it was animation. I was seeing the experience. It was exactly animation, but it was just destruction. It was like I seen like. It was the same. I had it at the same time as Kevin. I can remember Kevin shared that experience, and I shared what I want to tell you now. It was the scene was like it was desert. It was brown. It was beige, and there was like these. What the view? It was all like Rick and Morty. If you've seen a Rick and Morty on Netflix, the cartoon, it was that. That was the animation, and it was these creatures, and it was being destroyed by spaceships, and I could see the spaceships as well, and it was like crap animation, and I could see the spaceships. It was greys flying them, and they looked like pink jellyfish at first, but then I took my view went close up, because it was like it was being chased around this wherever it was, this brown place, and it was just being destroyed, just being zapped by lasers, and it was like I was shown it, and I was offered it, and I was like, I'd seen enough of the view, and I just says, it was like, I've had enough of seeing this, and it just ended like that. And it was and like, I can remember when Kevin had that experience, and I had mine around the same time, and I thought, yeah, I wonder if that's what they were showing me, and I didn't bring that back, because Kevin's recall is excellent, and mine's nowhere near as good. And I just thought, I wonder if that's what I was offered, but I just seen it a different way. But yeah, it was the same thing. And it was just life being destroyed. But at the end of the view, it was like they looked like, the characters from Pac-Man when they turned to ghosts and they're being chased by Pac-Man. They looked like that. That was what was being destroyed by the grey aliens that was flying around. And it was also flying around in pyramids as well. It was like operating them, and I could see it. Oh, it was crazy, but awesome as well. Yeah, I wanted to share that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I thought it was interesting. I've been running into like in Kevin's experience with the duplicate deceptors there, I've been running into a few of them, and I can't say that I haven't been tricked or detected all of their deception, but it is interesting because they do act in an out of character manner, so that it's getting more prevalent, it seems, on the real side, that they're trying to dishearten or discourage or just straight up confuse you.
Well, it's like Kevin said, isn't it? It can come as clones and that. They send clones out there and, confuse you. I mean, like, yes, there's clones, but it's not just of, I've seen some. I've seen one of the new friends ages ago, and thinking about it now, I said, there's no way it could have been this person. But yeah, it convinced me at the times to get the laugh out of me. But I won't go into it. But yeah, there's all, deceptors in it. They know what they're on with. They know what they're doing. And yeah, can put a start. I suppose it can put a stop to your progress if it, but if you let it. But yeah, you got to just be real with it, haven't you? Because they're good, and you know these experiences you get, you have to be, you know, the one I had, like I was convinced for months. I was like, it's like, yeah, it is. But like the more I think about it, I think no, maybe it wasn't. It was like, and I know like what they're doing. Like the more this has gone on, like the more, you know, it's like, yeah, they can send anyone as anyone. They can, you know, they can. The shapeshifters aren't there. They can just project. It can, you know, anyone. It could be your mum, your dad, your missus, your kids. It could be anyone. You could convince them that they're them. You know, that they are that person on the real side I'm talking about. But you know, it's more than likely not. It's more than likely deceptors, isn't it? If it's in one of the, you know, if it's a situation where it's like not good.
In this real side experience, I would find myself initially in a street setting and would suddenly be accosted by a selection of what looked to be dark force agents. I would bring abilities afforded me through my real awareness to bear. These agents seemed very formidable, however, and were determined to restrain me. Despite my knowing that I could have evaded a capture, that I could have, say, stepped fully into my real awareness, as I have on other occasions of attempted assault, such as this on the real side, that I could have stood in the reality of what is real beyond cause and effect, where I don't present as a created idea, with agreements that I have either activated through cause and effect, or those that are a part of the created consciousness of the personal self, that can generate effects that dark force assailants can feature in and then impose upon the idea of my created self on the real side. But sometimes I rather have the impression to either not fully step into this real awareness position beyond possible imposition, that as a result attacks are possible, but still very easy to deal with, that as a consequence of allowing myself to be embroiled, very often other experiences spin off from the situations that provide valuable viewpoints and comparisons that wouldn't have been made available had I just sat in the indifference of the real awareness, aside from all the ideas of creation. Or sometimes even more so, do I lean into my personal self, that I then am bested in such confrontation, captured, and again, for the same reason, experience spins off from my allowing my defeat or capture, that I wouldn't have seen had I not allowed this to be so. So really, the extent to which I stand in the protection of the real awareness depends on what the real awareness, the real guides and life, wants to show me also. When it comes to confrontation and conflict experiences, and adjustments are made accordingly. For in this case I was captured and taken to a kind of dark force experimental laboratory, a place I would not then have seen had I repelled my attackers, evaded capture, or just stood aside from all the ideas of creation in the real awareness where no ideas could reach. But then again, maybe I could have just moved my view through my real awareness to the lab and looked. But then again, these experiences that involve more turmoil, altercation, and confrontation tend to stick more in the mind. All good movies need their fight scenes and car chase moments, and so better for remembering these experiences by, on waking. I was now strapped to some kind of medical gurney, and being experimented on. I was in fact being transformed into something else. We might say there was agreement that facilitated this whole affair. Perhaps agreement to the idea of assuming new and more robust physical level vehicles has not only opened the door for vampires with their offers of turning us into their kind, or nanobot-infused individuals offering the same body modifications that they have, but maybe inadvertently an agreement to an idea that the dark forces can take advantage of also. For here my body vehicle was being enhanced, but rather crudely, and at the hands of this dark force scientist. Even if agreement had brought me inadvertently here, recognizing this was the case, I simply could withdraw the agreement and decide differently in that moment. Through the real awareness, we can simply recognize and pluck out those nonsensical agreements and discard them, and in the isness that everything is, the circumstances on the real side would instantly change in accordance with agreements no longer present that were affecting the situation. Then I would extricate myself from the predicament, and maybe teleport from the lab. But again, we don't always do that. Not that we are clinging onto nonsensical agreements necessarily, although that can be so through the personal self if we indulge it, but that were I to teleport from the lab, again I would never get to see what transpired, and then share later on a Skype. So it was more a case that I wanted to continue on with this experience, to go through it, safe in the knowledge that regardless of where it went or how far, I simply could retract agreement in any moment and be liberated from the causes that I had decided upon. Every moment is new after all, and no matter what has transpired up until this point, we can brush it all aside in the new nowness of this new moment with our real intent and ears focus. And by going through what we do, we have our viewpoints, comparisons, and experiences to relate. And so, there I was, strapped to the gurney, although the strappings not really necessary, as it was my decision to remain. The scientist would cover my body in a kind of paste that sunk into the skin. This seemed required for the application of various technology to my body. He cut off all my hair, which would have taken him a while, applying all these metallic implants that burrowed into the body, and some remaining externally on the epidermis, making me look a little like one of those Borg characters in Star Trek. I seemed to lose half of my body in the process, from the waist down, and rather would be resigned to a kind of mechanical base, looking a little also then like Davros from Doctor Who. Also, he applied some kind of component to my body that contained an awareness, as though this component was a vehicle just as viable as any other created consciousness vehicle that was animated by awareness. But just like most personal self-immersed individuals, this awareness, housed in the created consciousness of this component, wasn't aware of anything beyond its created consciousness self. It was as though the idea was of a symbiotic relationship being established between my altered, personal, created consciousness vehicle and that of the component attached now to it. I'm uncertain if this component containing this awareness was AI related or not, but I had to rather sync with it, almost to befriend it in a curious way, that it would cooperate, and I interacted with it by tapping keys on a mini keyboard that was part of this component that was attached to my body, almost like you would when you interact with anyone through social media, etc. Overall, my transformation bordered on the hideous, appearance-wise, but what it had become, in addition to this symbiosis with the awareness of the component, made it so that I had extraordinary creational manipulation abilities, not as extensive and cause and effect free as the abilities of the real awareness, but even so. For suddenly an individual burst into the lab and tried to attack me, as though an arranged test by the dark force scientist of a kind. This individual began blasting at me with a weapon or other, and I somehow created a sort of shield by splitting the very simulation of the lab in half, and inserting what looked like a slice of another part of the simulation between the two halves, that then presented as a boundary between me and my assailant. The slice of additional simulation looked like a scene from space, full of stars and planets and such, and no bullets could pass through the boundary it presented. Then I removed the space layer with a wave of my hand, as my would-be assassin had emptied his gun of bullets, transformed my hand into a mass of glowing tendril-like fibers, which shot across the lab, seized the gun-toting attacker around the body, and dragged him forwards towards me. The scientist seemed rather pleased with the results. I released the assailant, and the experience ended there. So I would suggest I was investigating what else the dark forces are involving themselves in by allowing my capture, that I could have a direct and first-hand experience of this curious procedure and the results. It didn't seem a very favourable body type, though certainly formidable, but I suspect the additional component, the AI awareness, if that's what it was, would be as a means of control, and so to agree to such a procedure wouldn't be a very advisable option. In other real side experiences, I've seen how, through the continuing of the process of awareness, of deciding to be a part of the galactic wake-up with the guides and Dwayne, that more resilient and robotic body types may be offered as an option to deal with the environmental stresses that our current bodies may struggle with. But those vehicles are just that, body types to continue on with. What the dark forces would be offering, or even imposing, if we agree with it, would be a more crude version, maybe a more sturdy body form, and perhaps with additional capability, but very likely controlled in some way through the dark forces and their technology, just as is their ultimate ambition of robotizing the human species, then controlling the robot body forms through the AI they will be connected with. Dwayne the great writer responded to this real side experience at the time of the sharing of it, and I quote, "We're doing this all the time, and it's just like buying a car and driving on the road. You're agreeing with the social structure of the controllers to do all that, but at the same time you're working your way along and becoming more aware. Listening to your experience, I do the same thing. I come across things all the time in the business world, the funding, etc., and even if the methods attempted are outlandish, I like to go through it even if it is that. But I have to test it to see, just like you. You have to go through it to see it, and most people would run. But you're at that point now where you want to see what's going on, and it's okay if they robotize you, because you have free will to do whatever you want. You can make whatever choice you want. You have the awareness. I go through the same things, and I will handle and deal with it, even when I'm warned, when I'm shown warnings. Just like when you're driving down the street and the sign on the right says slippery road ahead. What do? Stop driving? Park your car? Get out and walk? No, you keep driving, but now you're aware, you're more cautious, and you may slide off the road, but that's a risk you take. But then again, you might make it also. This is how it is in creation. And actually, with the real guides, we're always going to make it. We're just simply given the opportunity to take the risk, and most people won't. That's why they only go so far. When we share this, most people don't get it, because they look at their literal mind. They look at the legal systems. They look at the authorities, how you're not supposed to do that, etc. In other words, you're not supposed to be creative and make things better as a benefit. No, you're not to do that. You just obey the laws. So if your wife's having a baby, and it's due at any moment, and you're speeding along in your car beyond the speed limit, well, in those situations, you just take the risk. And the cops may pull you over, but then they might escort you, so you never know. You just take the risk. But those people that don't, they just stay boxed in their heads. That's all they see, thinking that they are playing it safe, and they really don't see how they have nothing, until they get to that endlessness all life is. But in the meantime, this is a lifelong journey, and more than that, but it's worth it.
Thank you, Kevin. And it is very important to take the risk and do it, because as long as, and Dwayne, I remember one time I was telling him about a confrontation that I had on the real side. He was saying, well, that's fine. You know, the personal self might get a little wet, as he said, but other than that, you're fine. You have that real awareness, because the personal self is just a body vehicle, and it can get destroyed and it's vulnerable and all these things, but that intent, that awareness, that will remain. Now, I had a question, Kevin, about your experience where you said that the option for better body vehicles was being offered. When was this offered? I'm curious.
It's been offered through a series of fairly consistent real side experiences that span back probably a good year or so, in various forms and various options being made available. Most tend to be along the more mechanical lines, but as I've said before, the that option which is being made available will be possibly mechanical forms to survive the rigors of the deteriorating physical world, but obviously robotic mechanical vehicles that won't be then controlled, which of course is what the dark forces would do if they had with their versions, that if they that they're trying to promote and get agreement for through the masses. And amongst all the various offers has been various other individuals and beings coming forward as well, almost in their own way wanting to be of assistance, and like the group of vampires I spoke about, who seemed sincere enough in their in what they were doing, but their offer was to convert new friends into vampires, and they believed that would provide them more robust and resilient and greater longevity through the body forms. But during that experience, I had the impression that wasn't the best thing to accept, because again, with these vampires and these other characters, they are overall personal self-immersed, and they tend to do then which doesn't make sense with the whole of life, because most of them don't have much by way of awareness or recognition of their real awareness, and with a lot of these characters, their intent does fluctuate moment by moment. But and the other experience I mentioned in the one I just recounted was when there was another group of individuals which already had sort of mechanics and robotic components inserted into their body vehicles, which again made them more robust and resilient. And they had this procedure where they had this lab on the real side, and if you went into it, you would be thus converted. And also, as a member, their body, the design, the addition of those components in their body vehicles allowed that they could actually manifest portals as well, and therefore transport themselves anywhere in creation they wanted. And that was So yeah, these options have been made available, and most of them are backed. Most of them are backed by and even arranged as options by the guides, and so you can be assured then they are for beneficial, making sense with life purposes, and not for control. But again, it all depends on the individual if they do indeed accept or decide on those options. Nothing's being imposed or forced. It's all about agreement. But as things stand, the world is getting ever more polluted and more poisoned. And so if things continue along their current trajectory, it will become increasingly harder to operate in a rapidly deteriorating and poisoned world. So,
and you mentioned portals. I remember when I came into the new presentation, I decided to step up. I was having some portal experiences, and I think the new friends were also practicing their abilities to create these portals and utilize them accordingly to have a means of transportation, it seemed.
yeah, there was a real exciting experience I shared recently where it showed the future view of the potential arrival of aliens and their spacecraft, and also what manifested in that scene was also portals as well, which indicated that that will be a physical level happening as well, and another option being made available. So not only the possibility of more robust and resilient body types, but also that the new friends will have the ability to manifest and operate portals. And actually, I had a series of real side experiences. I've shared some on this Witness show, where I was working with some grey aliens, and they were actually creating or making more effective a portal that was in my room. But my impression was it wasn't actually, the portal wasn't in the room as such. It was more a portal was on my left side, as though a portal through my very aura that I could then utilise as to literally relocate my physical body into some other location. And there was actually experience I've had very recently. I was going to share on the galactic thing, where this grey alien had returned again, and through this portal. And it was quite interesting as well, because what happened then was I made some adjustment to the portal, and some other things happened that I won't share. I'll share it with you for that. But it was as though, I mean, some people have asked me, well, if you've had practice and training with portal making on the real side, how will your personal self know how to do that if it is necessary to do so on the physical? It's almost a case of these real side experiences. You make these portals, but it's more your real awareness that knows how to do them, and your personal self is just viewing the experience. And but on that experience most recently, where the grey popped back through the portal again, what happened then was the real awareness came in and took direct control of my physical vehicle. So almost like on the real side, where you go through your experiences, the real awareness takes you through the experience, and it's your personal self that's taking a back seat and just viewing it, not interjecting itself. Otherwise it can mess up that which is occurring or taking place. And it was almost a case of that then being so on the physical. The real awareness came in and directly took control of my physical vehicle and made it manipulate this portal and this other stuff in such a way that my personal self would not have known how to do. So I suspect that as we have all had this training with portals on the real side, when it comes to the moment when we have to utilise them, the personal self need not concern itself about the particulars. I suspect the real awareness or even the guides will come in and literally work through your physical vehicle and do what is necessary to manifest these portals. And again, that will be through agreement. It's not some sort of possession or something going on, because really we're all this same one awareness animating all the body vehicles anyway. So who can say? So you can't really say you can't really say really there's, the body vehicles are actually with separate beings really, as it's really the same overall awareness is operating through all of them. And but regardless, agreement would be required that that be so, because on some of the experience regarding the portals, it involved an elaborate series of motions with the body vehicle and some strange hand, almost like making symbols in the air, and which seemed to activate these portals. And a lot of attunements and adjustments have been made through the frequencies of the physical body vehicle, so that these portals can be created on the physical, But as I said, I suspect it's more a case the real awareness will literally come in and take possession of, well, it's its body vehicle anyway, you know, but the personal self will then, it'll be, but based on that, then the personal self cannot then panic and get all concerned and interfere, because obviously if you panic or activate anything through the personal self, then you'll be effectively resisting the real awareness and not extending agreement for it to do so. So, as I said, what will happen then is, I think, when it is necessary to make the portals, suddenly you'll find your visual vehicle, I suspect, just making the portals without you, almost like you're being animated as though you were by a puppet master almost, which is your real awareness doing it. Then that's what I suspect will happen. So
And that's how it is. Anyways, the real awareness animates these vehicles, but I think people would get a little freaked out seeing it or having an experience. Like you said, it's not some type of possession. It's just a more so direct direction being taken with the creation of these portals.
yeah, so don't be surprised if you may experience that yourselves, or other new friends will suddenly experience having that sensation of your real awareness coming in and directly taking control of your physical vehicle. And because if this is going to be the case, obviously they want to get individuals used to this situation. They don't want to suddenly drop it on them, and then obviously as a result they'd be rather panic stricken when it takes place. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of people will find this happening to them in sort of small, you know, in various degrees and increments. But yeah, and these portals would presumably actually physically translocate the individual to another spot in creation. But I've also seen the possibility for a lot of real side experiences that there is also the option that if things did become particularly dire, and assuming that you didn't have these more robust, resilient body types, or you weren't for some reason able to make these portals, it does seem there was a lot of practice as well where things got really bad, then the real awareness, with agreement with the personal self, would just drop the body vehicle and transition onto the real side, rather than experience unnecessary trauma, you know, according to the situation. And there was also some other stuff as well where I had some experiences where what was also being arranged as well was almost like that may then take place where you drop the body vehicle and you transition to the real side, then you immediately have your awareness return into another body vehicle that's created in preparation for that in a safe location. So there's endless things going on. The person who on their process of awareness will always have more options than the individual who decides to stay with their personal self and creation. That's always going to be the case. So if nothing else, you will have a greater survivability in creation. So if nothing else, for individuals, I would have thought that would be a very good incentive to become more aware, you know, because awareness just affords more options, as it does, you know, in regards to your positioning in life, as regards to your survivability. Because the more aware you become, the more you become your real awareness, which is all about real survival, and it knows how to exactly what to do in every situation to ensure its best survival through all the life levels and into the real universes. So, you know, your safety is assured the more aware and the more you recognize and stand in your real awareness. So,
Well, thank you, Kevin, the great witness, for sharing those experiences and bringing them back from the real side, so that way we can all hear them and become more aware. And here we'll sing the NUUU song, which is the real connection, and I'll call people off here. First, Kevin. Pearce.
NUUU.
And then myself. NUUU. Okay, thank you everybody for being in attendance, and thank you, Kevin, for sharing again. Appreciate you guys being here.